The night Chukwudi's passport burned, the house did not catch fire. Only the future did. In the quiet compound, while everyone slept, while dreams were still innocent, flames licked blue paper that carried a boy's name, his date of birth, his only escape. The fire was small, controlled, careful, like envy always is. This is not a story about witchcraft. It is about jealousy wearing a human face. Chukwudi was the kind of boy people described with a quiet smile, the way you speak of something rare but gentle, bright, soft-spoken, never loud even when he was right. He lived in a modest compound where one house held too many histories, a polygamous home stitched together by loss, compromise, and survival. His biological mother died when he was still young, too young to understand why her voice disappeared from mornings and her laughter stopped filling the kitchen. For a long time the house felt hollow, like it was breathing but not alive. His father moved around like a man carrying something heavy in his chest, and Chukwudi learned early how to stay out of the way, how to make himself small. Then the stepmother came. She didn't arrive with noise or force. She arrived quietly, like someone who knew she was stepping into someone else's story. From the beginning, she treated Chukwudi with care, never replacing his mother, never pretending she could, but standing where she was needed. She learned the foods he liked. She checked his homework. She listened when he spoke, even when his voice barely rose above a whisper. When other children called her wicked woman in careless jokes, Chukwudi never understood it. To him, she was the woman who covered him at night when Harmattan cold crept in, the woman who scolded him gently when he skipped chores, not with bitterness, but concern, the woman who defended him when neighbors spoke carelessly about his late mother. There were two boys under the same roof, Chukwudi and her biological son Ikenna, different in temperament, different in ambition, but loved in the same space. Meals were shared. Laughter returned in small doses. The father smiled more. Even poverty felt lighter when peace lived in the walls. He called her Mama without fear, without guilt, without hesitation. And she accepted the name with humility, determined not to erase the past, but to hold the present steady. It wasn't a perfect home. Polygamy never is, but it worked. Chukwudi was not a boy of many words, but give him a ball and he could speak for hours. Behind their compound lay a wide, dusty field scarred with footprints and forgotten dreams. No goalposts, just two stones. No green grass, only dry earth that stained the feet brown and cracked the heels. Most days the ball itself was wounded, its leather torn and tied with string, wobbling as it rolled. That was where Chukwudi came alive. Barefoot he played with a hunger that frightened even him. Each sprint felt urgent, as though something terrible would happen if he slowed down. He moved like someone running away from poverty, from hunger, from the quiet shame of watching other children drop out of school because fees could not be paid. The dust rose around him, but it never distracted him. His control was unnatural. Soft first touches, sudden turns, passes delivered with intention. He didn't play to impress. He played to survive. Older boys cursed when he dribbled past them. Younger ones watched with wide eyes. Even men passing by slowed their steps. People began to notice. "Who is that boy? Is he trained?" someone once asked. "That one," another would reply. "He doesn't talk much, but watch his legs. He's just hungry." And without knowing it, football became his rebellion against destiny, against the life poverty had planned for him, against the limits placed on boys born into crowded houses with empty pockets. It wasn't a special day. That was the strange thing about it. No banners, no crowd, no whistle announcing destiny. Just another lazy afternoon match in the neighborhood. Boys shouting, dust rising, laughter breaking out whenever someone missed an easy shot. Chukwudi almost didn't play. He had chores to finish. Hunger tugged at his stomach, but when the ball rolled onto the field, his feet answered before his doubts could. He moved differently from the others. Every touch, every dribble, every sudden turn felt deliberate, almost precise, as if the ball obeyed his thoughts. Dust rose around him in clouds, marking his path, yet he never seemed to stumble. The other boys played to pass time. Chukwudi played like he was running from something, like each goal was a step toward a life he refused to accept as ordinary. From the edge of the field, a man watched quietly. He didn't clap. He didn't shout encouragement. He just followed the boy, his eyes sharp, noticing everything. Age, form, coordination, instinct. It all mattered to him. When the game ended, he approached Chukwudi with a careful smile, notebook in hand. "What's your name?" "Chukwudi," he answered, eyes lowered out of habit. "How old are you?" 16. More questions followed. Where he went to school, if he had ever been trained, if he had documents. The man scribbled notes in a small book like he was afraid to forget something important. "You play very well," he said finally. Chukwudi nodded, unsure what to do with the words. Compliments were common, opportunities were not. The man explained gently. He worked with an organization that helped discover young talents, boys like him, raw, unpolished, overlooked. They sponsored training, sometimes travel. The word travel landed softly, like a promise too fragile to hold. Chukwudi listened, heart pounding, trying not to hope too quickly. The man took his father's contact, promised to return, promised nothing and yet everything. As the sun dipped and shadows stretched across the field, Chukwudi walked home slower than usual. The dust clung to his feet. The house looked the same, life looked the same. But somewhere inside him something new had entered. The man returned a week later. This time he didn't stand at the edge of the field. He came straight into the compound, wearing quiet confidence and carrying a folder that looked too important for a house like theirs. Neighbors pretended not to stare. Children slowed their play. Something serious was happening. Chukwudi's father called everyone into the sitting room. The man spoke calmly, professionally, as if he was discussing something ordinary, but every word landed like thunder. They had reviewed Chukwudi's performance. They believed in his talent. They were willing to sponsor him, training, development, exposure. And if all went well, Europe. The room went silent. Training abroad, professional football, legal documents, a future that didn't involve borrowing money or choosing between school fees and food. It sounded unreal, like a story meant for other families. Chukwudi looked at his father. The old man's hands trembled. His eyes filled slowly, stubborn tears breaking through years of hardship. He turned away, embarrassed, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I never thought," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I never thought one of my children would get this chance." For the first time in years, he cried, not from pain, not from hunger, but from hope. Chukwudi sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid the moment might shatter if he breathed too loudly. Then the stepmother smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't bitter. It was a real smile, the kind that lifts the face naturally. She clapped her hands softly and thanked God out loud. She hugged Chukwudi, holding him longer than usual. "My son," she said, pride warm in her voice, "you will go far." But as the conversation continued, talk of passports, visas, travel timelines, something quiet shifted inside her, a thought she didn't invite, a comparison she didn't want. She glanced at her own son sitting in the corner, uninterested. restless, his future uncertain. The smile stayed on her face, but deep inside a small crack formed. Word spread quickly the way good news always does in poor neighborhoods. Neighbors came in twos and threes, then in crowds. Women ululated at the gate. Men shook Chukwudi's father's hand until his fingers ached. Some praised God, some praised the boy, some praised the stepmother for raising him well. "You people are blessed," they said. "This is the reward of patience. From this house to Europe." The compound buzzed with joy. Laughter bounced off cracked walls. Even poverty stepped aside for a few hours, ashamed to interrupt happiness. The dream didn't move fast. It moved in paperwork. Forms replaced footballs, queues replaced dusty fields. Chukwudi found himself standing for hours under the sun at government offices, clutching brown envelopes like they contained his heartbeat. Passport photographs were taken, his face serious, his eyes unsure of how to pose for a future he'd never imagined. "Stand straight, don't smile. Look at the camera." Each instruction felt like a test. His father followed him everywhere, silent but proud, holding documents like sacred items. Sometimes they waited all day and achieved nothing. Sometimes they were told to return next week. But no one complained. Suffering had trained them for patience. Every receipt mattered. Chukwudi folded them carefully, slid them into a plastic folder, and hid them under his mattress at night. He checked them often, just to be sure they were real, just to be sure the dream hadn't disappeared. On the field, something changed. His football boots, old, donated, peeling at the sides, felt lighter. His legs felt freer. When he ran, he no longer ran only from poverty. He ran towards something. Hunger still existed, but it no longer felt permanent. Poverty still hovered, but it finally looked temporary. Neighbors watched him with new eyes now. Younger boys followed him around asking questions about Europe, about airplanes, about life beyond the dust. He answered gently, careful not to boast, afraid pride might anger fate. At home, the stepmother reminded him to be careful with his documents. She asked about appointments. She prayed for him out loud. She sincerely meant every word. The passport arrived on a Tuesday. Nothing about the day felt special at first. The sun rose as usual. The compound stirred slowly. Chukwudi left the house early, heart steady, hope cautious. He had learned not to expect too much. When the official called his name, it took a second to register. Chukwudi Okafor. He stepped forward, palms suddenly damp. The man reached into a drawer and brought it out. A small blue booklet, clean, solid, unmistakably real. Chukwudi held it with both hands. It felt heavier than it looked, weighted with borders, airports, and a future that finally had shape. He didn't wait. He ran. Barefoot down the road, dust rising behind him, breath uneven, a wide smile breaking free despite himself. Neighbors stared, children laughed. He didn't slow down. At home, he burst through the door. "Papa!" His father took the passport carefully, like something holy. He turned it over and over, fingers trembling. His lips moved in silent prayer before tears welled up and spilled freely. "A document," he whispered, voice shaking. "A door." For a moment the room stood still. The stepmother watched from the corner. She smiled softly, proudly, but the feeling inside her was no longer simple. She looked at the passport, then at Chukwudi, then, without meaning to, at her own son. The smile remained, but her chest tightened. The passport lay on the table, blue and innocent, glowing with promise. And in its quiet presence, something unseen began to change. Sleep avoided her that night. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made thoughts louder. The stepmother lay on her bed staring into the darkness, listening to the slow breathing of others, feeling her own heart refuse to settle. The image of the blue passport kept returning, uninvited, unrelenting. She rose and walked into her son's room. He slept heavily, sprawled across the mattress, one arm flung carelessly to the side. Street scars traced faint lines on his skin, marks of fights that led nowhere. No books beside his bed, no plans waiting for morning. Just a boy drifting, wasting years that could never be returned. Her chest tightened. This is my child, she thought. My blood. She stood there for a long moment, watching him, wondering where things had gone wrong, how discipline had turned into indulgence, how hope had slowly given way to disappointment. Then her thoughts betrayed her again, sliding toward Chukwudi. She remembered the day she first held him after his mother's burial, how small he had been, how careful she had been not to overstep, not to replace, only to support. She remembered washing his clothes, defending him, calling him my son without hesitation. She had loved him, truly, and yet the passport existed. Europe waited for him. A life beyond dust and borrowed shoes, a future bright enough to expose the shadows in her own home. The contrast hurt more than she expected. She returned to her room and sat on the edge of the bed, arguing with herself in whispers. It's not his fault. His success will help everyone. God gives differently. But another voice answered, soft, persuasive. What about your own son? Who will open doors for him? Why should one child rise while the other sinks? Love and envy wrestled in her chest, neither willing to surrender. Love reminded her of kindness, of years of care. Envy pointed to failure, to fear, to a future slipping away. She knew where the passport was. Her feet carried her there before her mind could catch up. She found the folder easily, slid it out with shaking hands. The blue booklet stared back at her, innocent, powerful, final. Her hands moved. She struck the match and watched the flame catch. The fire was small, controlled, almost gentle. The passport curled, blackened, vanished into ash. The smell hit her first. Regret followed immediately. Sharp, choking, unforgiving. Her chest tightened. Her hands began to shake violently. What have I done? She stamped out the ashes, her mind racing, panic clawing at her throat. There was no undoing it, no explanation that could return what had been destroyed. It wasn't just paper. It was opportunity. It was escape. It was a boy's future. She sank to the floor, pressing her hands to her mouth to keep from screaming. By the time the fire died, she knew, deep, certain, irreversible, that in one reckless night she had not only burned a passport, she had burned everything. Morning came as usual. The sun rose, the compound stirred, life moved forward, unaware that something precious had already died. Chukwudi woke with excitement still clinging to him. Today felt important. He reached for the folder out of habit, out of love. It wasn't there. At first, he smiled, thinking he had misplaced it. He searched under the mattress, behind the cupboard, inside his bag. The smile faded. His heartbeat quickened. He checked again and again. Papa? Mama? His voice cracked, panic crawling up his throat. Have you seen my documents? His father appeared in the doorway, confusion written deep across his face. What is it, my son? They were here, Chukwudi stammered. All of them. The passport. It's gone. The father's eyes narrowed. Gone? What do you mean, gone? Who would? The stepmother stood by the doorway, caught in the sudden storm of accusation. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried to speak, to explain, but the words stuck like thorns. Chukwudi's voice rose, panic turning to desperation. "It was right here I had it. Mama, tell me you saw it." His father's face darkened. His voice grew sharp, trembling with anger and fear. "This isn't a joke. Someone tell me what happened." The stepmother's hands shook. She couldn't run from the truth, couldn't hide from the weight of her actions. With a faltering breath, she admitted it. I burned it." The words hit the room like a collapse. Chukwudi froze. His eyes widened. No, you can't." The father staggered back as if struck. Chukwudi froze, staring at her, unable to understand the sounds she had just made. The house seemed to shrink, walls closing in, air disappearing. "You what?" the father asked, his voice shaking. She fell to her knees, crying, words tumbling out, envy, fear, regret, but none of it mattered. The damage had already swallowed everything. Chukwudi dropped to the floor, clutching his head, a sound tearing out of him that was neither cry nor scream. The father clutched his chest suddenly, a sharp pain twisting through him like fire. He gasped, staggering back, words failing him. "Papa!" Chukwudi screamed, rushing forward. But the old man's legs gave way. He fell onto the dusty floor, coughing, wheezing, eyes wide with both fear and heartbreak. My son, your future," he murmured, clutching Chukwudi's shoulder weakly. The room spun around them. Panic gripped Chukwudi as he tried to lift his father as if sheer will could undo the damage. The stepmother's hands shook as she tried to call for help, but the truth of the night had already poisoned every breath. And then, in one final shuddering gasp, the father's eyes closed, his body slumped, fragile and still, leaving Chukwudi holding only loss upon loss. He had died knowing that the future he had dreamed for his son, the escape from poverty, the promise of success, had already perished, consumed by envy before he could ever see it realized. Depression didn't arrive loudly. It came quietly, and it stayed. Chukwudi stopped waking up early. The mornings no longer called his name. The boots that once waited by the door gathered dust, untouched, forgotten like promises people make when they still believe life is fair. Football felt stupid now. What was the point of chasing a ball when the world had already decided where he would end up? The house changed after his father's death. Not physically, spiritually. The walls felt heavier, the air colder. Every corner whispered blame. Every silence screamed loss. Even daylight felt intrusive, like it had no right to enter a home that had buried hope. He stopped talking, stopped laughing, stopped imagining. Once he had seen stadiums in his dreams, crowds chanting his name, a jersey with his number, his mother smiling somewhere in the stands, his father alive, proud. That version of him died with the ashes of a passport and the final beat of a broken heart. He avoided mirrors. The boy staring back looked smaller, duller, like someone who'd been told again and again that dreams were for other people. Friends stopped checking in. Coaches stopped calling. Life moved on, as it always does, leaving the broken to clean up quietly. At night, he lay awake, listening to the house breathe. The same house where betrayal had walked freely. The same house where love had failed him. Sometimes he wondered if the house was cursed, or if he was. And in that emptiness, Chukwudi made a quiet decision without even realizing it. He would stop dreaming because dreaming had become too expensive. Help did not arrive like a miracle. It came like noise. A knock, sharp, unapologetic, too loud for a house that had learned how to grieve quietly. Chukwudi almost didn't open the door. Standing there was Amika, a former classmate he barely recognized. Same age, different outcome, clean clothes, confident eyes, city posture. The kind of man who had learned how to survive Lagos without asking life for permission. They stared at each other for a second too long. "You're still here," Amika said. Not cruelly, just honestly. That sentence did more damage than sympathy ever could. "I heard about your father," Amika said. He didn't offer condolences, didn't mention football, didn't pretend to understand grief. He looked around the compound, the cracked walls, the tired air, and nodded like someone confirming a theory. "Pack a bag," he said. "You're coming with me." Chukwudi laughed, a dry, broken sound. "For what?" "For struggle," Emeka replied. "The honest kind. No promises. No speeches. No fake hope." The city didn't welcome Chukwudi. It tested him immediately. Long bus rides, overcrowded rooms, sleepless nights, jobs that paid in insults before cash, carrying loads, running errands, standing all day just to be ignored. Hunger that didn't care about his past. Lagos didn't know his story. And didn't want to. And strangely, that helped. Nobody here saw him as the boy who almost escaped. He was just another young man trying not to drown. Emeka showed him survival, not shortcuts, how to move fast, how to stay alert, how to swallow pride and keep going, how to wake up even when nothing felt worth waking up for. "You don't need to believe in tomorrow," Emeka told him one night, sharing bread on a curb. "Just survive today. Tomorrow will get jealous and show up." Something in Chukwudi stirred. Not hope, not yet, but motion. His body remembered movement before his heart did. His legs grew stronger from work. His lungs filled with city air. Dirty, heavy, real. At night, exhaustion knocked him into sleep before sadness could finish its sentences. For the first time since everything broke, life was demanding his attention again. He wasn't being saved. He was being used by life, and that, somehow, was enough to keep him standing. And without realizing it, Chukwudi had taken his first step back into the world. Back home, death did not knock politely. It crashed in. The stepmother's son, reckless, loud, forever in a hurry to nowhere, never made it back one evening. A borrowed motorcycle, speed, laughter, then metal screamed and the road chose silence. By morning, the house that was flooded with wails. No warning. No second chance. No bargaining. His body lay still where dreams had never stayed long enough to grow. The same hands that had fed him now trembled over his cold face. The same mother who had feared comparison now begged the heavens for reversal. But life does not reverse. The house became a museum of regret. Every corner whispered, if only. The walls remembered laughter. The air remembered envy. And the fire pit in the backyard, quiet now, remembered a blue passport turning to ash. That night the stepmother broke. Not the controlled tears of guilt. Not the performative crying of grief. This was collapse. She reached out to Chukwudi through borrowed numbers, shaking fingers, and a voice that barely held together. "I loved you," she said, crying. "I truly did, but envy entered my heart, and I let it stay." Silence sat between them. She confessed everything. How fear blinded her, how comparison poisoned her, how one foolish night destroyed generations. She said she would trade her life, her son, her future, anything, to undo that moment. But time does not accept bribes. Chukwudi listened. He didn't shout. He didn't forgive. He didn't curse her. He had aged past anger. The boy who once ran barefoot on dusty fields had grown old inside. Loss had matured him faster than years ever could. He understood now that envy doesn't always come from hatred. Sometimes it grows quietly inside love, unnoticed, until it is too late. "I hear you," he said finally, and that was all. When the call ended, Chukwudi sat in the city night, staring at moving headlights, wondering how one act could burn so many lives at once. Karma had knocked. Not to teach a lesson, but to collect a debt no one could afford. Time did what it always does. It moved on, whether anyone was ready or not. Years later, Chukwudi was okay. Not famous, not legendary, just steady. He built a life brick by brick, the way men who have lost too much tend to do. A small business that grew into something respectable. Employees who trusted him. Rent paid on time. Food that didn't require prayer before every bite. Success without applause, but solid, earned real. At night, when the city finally slowed, Chukwudi sometimes sat alone with the television on mute, watching European football. The grass always looked unreal. Too green, too soft. Players glided like the ground loved them back. He watched with the calm interest of someone observing a parallel universe. Every now and then a winger would sprint down the flank, barefoot dreams replaced by million-dollar boots, and something gentle would tug at his chest. Not pain, not anger, just curiosity. Would that have been me? Could I have survived that world? Would I have loved the game, or would it have broken me differently? There was no bitterness in the questions. Life had taught him that bitterness is a luxury for people who still expect explanations. He had made peace with reality, not because it was fair, but because resisting it had grown exhausting. Sometimes, after a particularly beautiful goal, he smiled. A small one, private. Football had been his first language. Life became his second. And though the dream had died young, it had not been wasted. It had trained him to endure loss, to keep moving, to build meaning from ruins. Chukwudi turned off the television, stood up and locked his shop for the night. The boy who once ran barefoot from poverty had not reached Europe. But he had reached himself. And some journeys, he finally understood, end exactly where they are meant to. Moral of the story: resilience shapes destiny. Chukwudi's life shows that even when dreams are stolen, survival, hard work and persistence can create new paths, though the what could have been may always linger.